One of the most powerful weapons against insect damage for the organic vegetable grower is fine netting, because this material allows us to control the airspace around our vegetables. Now, why would we want to control the airspace, you might think? Because it's caterpillars that are eating my vegetables, not birds or butterflies. But many insect problems actually start with a moth or fly that lays its eggs on or around your plants. Those eggs then hatch into caterpillars and larvae that hungrily munch away on your tasty vegetable plants. Once we recognized how well this insect netting works to prevent damage to our vegetables, we started using it very regularly. But we also started to explore ways for us to use this netting more easily, because it obviously prevents us from getting to our vegetables as well. Sometimes the simplest and best solution is to just pin the netting down over the bed, letting the plants support the weight of the netting. But in other cases, when the insect netting is in direct contact with plant leaves, certain insects will exploit this opportunity to stick their little sapsuckers through the netting and still do some damage. Therefore, some crops benefit from the additional support of hoops to keep the netting well above the plant leaves, especially when the plants are young. While smaller hooped structures like this do work effectively to support the insect netting, after years of repeatedly uncovering and recovering beds like this every time I wanted to access my vegetables, I started to wonder if it might be easier if I could somehow build a larger structure that was big enough for me to walk into. Then all of the hoops and the netting could remain in place for the entire season. This would significantly lower the risk of allowing insects into the enclosed space because the netting would always be in place. There'd be much less wear and tear on the netting as well, since I'd never be removing it. And maybe best of all, there'd be a lot less work every time I wanted to complete a harvest. And these time savings would be significant for crops like broccolini and kale that I would need to harvest many times throughout the growing season. Enter the walk-in netted tunnel. We've been using structures like this to protect our vegetables for 4 years now, and it's downright blissful to walk into one of these things every single time because there are no insects constantly ravaging our vegetables. Our students have been having success with similar structures, so I thought it was time to make a video about how you can assemble one of these structures yourself, and all with off-the-shelf parts that you can find at most hardware stores. Let's have a look at the process. Before I start to assemble anything, I lay out 5-foot lengths of conduit over our 20-foot long beds to make sure I spaced my posts 5 feet apart. This early step helps my 5-foot long top bars fit properly at the end. Now I can start tapping in the 5-foot lengths of conduit that we use for the posts. A sledgehammer makes this easy, but you can damage the ends of the conduit if you're not careful. So to protect the ends, I rest a large metal bolt on the top of the conduit to evenly distribute the force of the hammer. I tap the posts about 2 feet deep into the ground, then I take an extra minute to check if their tops are level and make any necessary adjustments. If the tops of my posts are level at this point, the top of my end structure will be level too. Next I can add the hoops. These are the exact same conduit hoops we use for our low tunnels, and I demonstrate how you can easily bend these yourself in my low tunnel video, so I'll link to that at the end of this video. To attach the hoops to the posts, we use these 1-inch polypipe couplings. The connectors are screwed onto the hoops beforehand so that once I'm out in the field, the hoops can slide over the tops of the posts and balance there independently. So at this point, I just need to add one more screw in the bottom half of each connector to fasten each hoop to the post below. The hoops are still quite wobbly at this stage, but the top bar and insect netting will add a lot more rigidity to the assembly in the steps to follow. Now I take 5 more 5-foot lengths of conduit to screw in as top bars between the hoops. The best connector for these joints is the 1-inch polypipe cross or the 1-inch polypipe T for the end hoops. And I slid one of these connectors up to the middle of each hoop beforehand. So now I can just attach the top bars to these connectors by adding 1 screw on each end. Next comes the cover of insect netting, which is broken into 2 halves. I drape the netting over the frame and tie the ends to a stake that I've previously pounded into the ground. I screw a polypipe elbow to the top of each stake to help prevent the netting from slipping off the top. Otherwise, the netting is just secured by wrapping it around this end stake and tying it tight with a short length of bungee cord. The bottom edges of the netting must be held down firmly as well, and for that job I like to use these red plastic repins. They press right through the edges of the netting and into the soil, and their wide top helps distribute their holding force over a large area so that the netting doesn't rip. You can use rocks, bricks, or anything heavy for this purpose as well, but I prefer these pins because they're light and easy to move around. Now our netting installation is half done, and I'm glad because this is when my camera decided to turn off due to the heat. Thankfully, you didn't miss a thing because the second side was just the same as the first. There, that was quick. And now you can see one of the advantages of using 2 pieces of netting instead of just 1. The 2 pieces overlap on the end walls to make a simple door opening that doesn't require any extra buttons or zippers.
Lastly, I'll add a few additional items for extra security. One is a length of bungee cord fastened over the center of the tunnel. This keeps the netting from billowing outward on windy days. For this feature, I tie a 30-foot length of bungee cord into a loop and clip this loop into a small carabiner that I anchor to the base of each center post with a hose clamp like this. I also use a small collection of spring clamps to keep the netting snug along the seams where the netting overlaps on top of the tunnel, and often one or two more on the end walls to help keep the doorways tight. And here's a look at the finished tunnel. I think it looks pretty slick, but more importantly, it serves a valuable purpose. Now I can head inside the tunnel to remove that protective netting that we've used over these beds when the crops were first transplanted. And from this point on, I'll be able to easily tend to or harvest any of the crops in here without making any changes to the netting. And the constant cover of netting will stop most of the troublesome pests from getting to our vegetables. The plants will remain healthy and productive for the entire season, and the food we harvest will be clean, beautiful, and free of holes.
So there's a look at how we assemble one of these structures. The takedown is even easier, so we've had no trouble moving it from one location to another as our crop selection and garden plans change throughout the years. I've even used the same exact structure, only with bird netting, to protect our strawberry beds. If you'd like to make a walk-in tunnel just like this one, I'll leave a list of the parts we used in the video description. Now you're all set to make an investment in pest-free vegetable growing that will serve you for many years to come. See you in the next one.